And hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bob Keyser. This is the Son of Man Urantia Project. Today's episode is chapter 56, Wednesday, the rest day. Before we get going, it's 14 days until Good Friday. I have 11 papers to get put into video between now and then. So we got a full press going here. Things are going to get a little sloppier. Might have a hair or two out of place, that kind of thing. And there's also a lot of noise in the background. There's 11 rescue animals here and probably just as many within 20 feet in everybody else's houses. But my sense of urgency on getting this project done is just going through the roof. You know the story. We've got to get her done. Okay, so moving on. Here we go. Chapter 56, Wednesday, the rest day. When not teaching the people, Jesus and the apostles normally took Wednesday off to rest. On this particular Wednesday, they ate breakfast later than usual. A noticeable silence had fallen over the camp, and little was said during the first half of the meal. At last, Jesus spoke. I want you to rest today. Take time to think about all that has happened since we came to Jerusalem and meditate on what is just ahead of the things that I have plainly told you. Make sure that the truth stands in your lives and that you grow daily in grace. After breakfast, Jesus told Andrew that he was going to be gone for the day and suggested that the apostles be allowed to spend the time however they wanted, except that under no circumstances should anyone go into the gates of Jerusalem. As Jesus got ready to go into the hills alone, David Zebedee went to him and said, You well know, Master, that the rulers and Pharisees want to destroy you, and yet you are getting ready to go into the hills alone. This is stupid. I am going to send 3 armed men with you to see that nothing happens on the way. Jesus looked over at the 3 well-armed and muscular Galileans and said to David, You mean well, but you are wrong. You fail to understand that the Son of Man needs no one to defend him. No man will touch me until I am ready to lay down my life in conformity to my Father's will. These men cannot come with me. I want to go alone so that I can talk with the Father. After David heard this, he and his armed guards left Jesus alone. But as Jesus was starting off by himself, John Mark came up to him with a small basket of food and water and suggested that if he intended to be away all day, he might find himself getting hungry. One day, alone with God. Jesus smiled at John, and as he was about to take the lunch basket from John's hand, the young man ventured to say, But Master, you might set the basket down while you turn aside to pray, and then forget it. Besides, if I go along to carry your lunch, you'll be more free to worship, and I promise to be quiet. I will ask no questions, and I will stay by the basket when you go off by yourself to pray. While making this speech, which astonished some of the nearby listeners, John Mark would not let go of the basket. There they stood, both John and Jesus, holding the basket. After a moment, Jesus let go, and looking down at the lad said, Since with all of your heart you crave to go with me, it will not be denied you. We will go off by ourselves and have a good visit. You can ask me any question that comes up in your heart, and we will comfort and console each other. You can start out carrying the lunch, and when you get tired, I will help you. Follow me. Jesus did not return to the camp until after sunset. He had spent his last day of peace and quiet on earth visiting with this truth-hungry lad, and talking with his Paradis father. The event has become known on high as the day that a young man spent with God in the hills. Forever, this occasion exemplifies the willingness of the Creator to become friends with the creature. Even a youth, if the desire of their heart is pure, can command the attention and enjoy the loving companionship of the God of the universe. In other words, actually experience the unforgettable joy of being alone in the hills with God for a whole day. And that was John Mark's unique experience on this Wednesday in the Judean hills. Jesus visited a lot with Mark that afternoon, talking freely about the affairs of this world and the next. John told Jesus how much he regretted that he had not been old enough to be one of the apostles, and told him how much he appreciated that he had been permitted to follow along with them since their first preaching at the Jordan Ford near Jericho, through all of the trips, except for the time Jesus went to Phoenicia. Jesus warned John not to become discouraged by upcoming events, and Jesus assured him that he would live to become a mighty messenger in the kingdom. John Mark was thrilled by this day's memories of being with Jesus in the hills, but he never forgot the Master's final instruction, told to him just as they were about to return to the Gethsemane camp. Jesus said, "Well, John, we have had a good visit, a real day of rest. But see to it that you tell no one of the things that I told you." And John never did tell anyone anything that happened on this day that he spent with Jesus in the hills. Throughout the few remaining hours of Jesus' life on earth, John Mark never let the Master out of his sight for long. The lad was always hiding nearby. He slept only when Jesus slept. Early home life. While visiting with John Mark, Jesus spent quite a bit of time comparing their early childhoods and later boyhood experiences. Although John's parents had been wealthier than Jesus' parents had been, there was a lot in their childhoods that were similar. Jesus said many things that helped John to better understand his parents and the other members of his family. And when he asked Jesus how he knew that he would turn out to be a mighty messenger of the kingdom, Jesus said, "I know you will prove loyal to the gospel of the kingdom. I can depend on your present love and faith, because these qualities are grounded in the early training you had at home. You are the product of a home where the parents were sincerely affectionate, and because of that, you have not been spoiled. Neither has your personality been messed up by your parents scheming between themselves for your confidence and loyalty, the one against the other. You have enjoyed the type of parental love that ensures worthy self-confidence and fosters normal feelings of security. But you are also lucky that your parents had wisdom as well as love. It was wisdom that led them to withhold most forms of indulgence and many luxuries that wealth can buy, while they sent you to the synagogue school along with your friends from the neighborhood. They also encouraged you to learn how to live in this world by letting you gain your own experiences. You came over to the Jordan, where we preached and John's disciples baptized, with your young friend, Amos. Both of you wanted to go with us. When you both returned to Jerusalem, your parents said yes. Amos's parents said no. They loved their son so much that they denied him the blessed experience that you have had right up to this day. By running away from home, Amos could have joined us, but if he had, he would have wounded love and sacrificed loyalty. Even if such an action had been wise, it would have been a terrible price to pay for liberty, experience, and independence. Wise parents, such as yours, See to it that their children do not have to wound love or loyalty in order to become independent and enjoy vitalizing liberty when they have grown up to your age. Love, John, is the supreme reality of the universe when it is given by all wise beings. But it is a dangerous and oftentimes semi-selfish trait when it is displayed in the experience of mortal parents. When you get married and have children of your own to raise, make sure that your love is cautioned by wisdom and guided by intelligence. Your young friend, Amos, believes this gospel of the kingdom just as much as you do, but I cannot fully depend on him. I am not certain what he will do in the years to come. His early home life was not the type that would produce a wholly dependable person. Amos is too much like one of the apostles who failed to enjoy a wise, normal, and loving childhood. Your whole afterlife will be more happy and dependable because you spent your first 8 years in a normal and well-regulated home. You possess a strong and well-knit character because you grew up in a home where love prevailed and wisdom reigned. Such training in childhood produces a type of loyalty that assures me that you will finish what you start. For more than an hour, John and Jesus continued to talk about the home life. Jesus went on to explain to John how a child is completely dependent on its parents and what happens in the home for all of their early ideas of everything, moral, social, intellectual, and even spiritual, since the family represents all that the child can first to know of either human or divine relationships. The child must get their first impressions of the universe from the mother's care, and they are wholly dependent on the earthly father for their first ideas of the heavenly Father. The child's later life is made happy or unhappy, easy or difficult, based on their early mental and emotional life, and conditioned by the social and spiritual relationships in the home. A human being's entire afterlife is enormously influenced by what happens during the first few years of existence. It is our sincere belief that the gospel, Jesus' word, based like it is on the father-child relationship, can hardly enjoy worldwide acceptance until the home life of the modern civilized people embraces more love and more wisdom. Even though parents in the 20th century have great knowledge and increasing truth for ennobling the home life, it remains a fact that very few modern homes are very good places to nurture boys and girls, like Jesus' home in Galilee and John Mark's home in Judea, where, although that said, and John Mark's home in Judea were. Now, although that said, the acceptance of Jesus' gospel will result in an immediate improvement in home life. The love in a wise home and the loyal devotion of true religion exert a strong mutual influence on each other. Such a home life enhances religion, and genuine religion always glorifies the home. It is true that many of the objectionable, cramping, and child-stunting influences of these old Jewish homes have been virtually eliminated, and many of the better regulated modern homes. There is, indeed, more spontaneous freedom and far more personal liberty. But this liberty is not restrained by love, motivated by loyalty, or directed by intelligent, disciplined wisdom. As long as we teach the child to pray, "Our Father who is in heaven," a tremendous responsibility rests on all earthly fathers to live and order their homes so that the word Father becomes worthy and enshrined in the minds and hearts of all growing children. The day at camp. The apostles spent most of this day walking around Mount Olivet and visiting with the disciples who were camped with them. But early in the afternoon, they started getting anxious for Jesus to return. As the day wore on, they grew increasingly worried about his safety. They were overwhelmed with loneliness without him. There was a lot of talk during the day as to whether or not Jesus should have been allowed to go off by himself alone into the hills, accompanied by only an errand boy. But although no man said this out loud, there was not one of them, except Judas Iscariot, who did not wish it was him who was in John Mark's place. It was about midway through the afternoon when Nathanael made his speech on supreme desire to about half a dozen of the apostles and as many disciples, the ending of which was, "What is wrong with most of us is that we are only half-hearted. We fail to love the Master as he loves us. If we had all wanted to go with him as much as John Mark did, he would surely have taken all of us. We stood by while the lad went up to the master and offered him the basket. But when the master took hold of it, the lad would not let go. And so the master left us here and went off into the hills with boy, basket, and all." About 4 o'clock, runners came to David Zebedee, bringing him word from his and Jesus' mothers at Bethsaida. Several days before, David had made up his mind that the Sanhedrin was going to kill Jesus. David knew that they were determined to destroy the Master, and he was almost convinced that Jesus would neither exert his divine power to save himself or permit his followers to use force to defend him. Having come to this decision, he lost no time sending a messenger to his mother, urging her to come at once to Jerusalem and bring Jesus' mother Mary and every other member of his family along with her. David's mother did as her son asked, and now the runners came back to David bringing the word that his mother and Jesus' entire family were on their way to Jerusalem, and that they would arrive sometime late the following day or very early the next morning. Since David did this on his own initiative, he thought it wise to keep the matter to himself. So he told no one that Jesus' family was on the way to Jerusalem. Shortly after noon, more than 20 of the Greeks who had met with Jesus and the 12 at Joseph of Arimathea's home arrived at the camp, and Peter and John spent several hours meeting with them. These Greeks, at least some of them, were well schooled in the knowledge of the kingdom, having been instructed by Rodan at Alexandria. That evening, after returning to the camp, Jesus visited with the Greeks. If it had not been for how much it would have disturbed his apostles and leading disciples, he would have ordained these 20 Greeks, just like he had the 70. While all of this was going on at the camp in Jerusalem, the Sanhedrin was amazed that Jesus did not return to talk to the people. True, the day before, when he had left the temple, he said, "I leave your house to you desolate." But they could not understand why he would be willing to give up the great advantage he had in the friendly crowds. While they feared he would stir up a commotion among the people, the Master's last words to the crowd had been advice to conform in every reasonable manner with the authority of those who sit in Moses' seat. But it was a busy day in the city as they simultaneously prepared for the Passover and perfected their plans for destroying Jesus. Not many people came to the camp. It had been kept a well-guarded secret by everyone who knew, that Jesus was expecting to stay there instead of going out to Bethany every night. Judas and the chief priests. Shortly after Jesus and John Mark left the camp, Judas Iscariot disappeared from among the group and did not return until late in the afternoon. This confused and dissatisfied apostle, in spite of Jesus' specific request to not go into Jerusalem, went quickly to keep his appointment with Jesus' enemies at Caiaphas' home. This was an informal meeting of the Sanhedrin and had been set for shortly after 10 o'clock that morning. This meeting was called to discuss the nature of the charges that should be brought against Jesus and to decide how to bring him before the Roman authorities so they could secure the necessary civil approval to confirm the death sentence that they had already passed on him. The day before, Judas had told some of his relatives and some of the Sadducees that they knew that he had decided that, while Jesus was a well-meaning dreamer and idealist, he was not the expected deliverer of Israel. Judas said that he would really like to find some way of withdrawing gracefully from the whole movement. His friends, flattering him, assured him that his breaking away from Jesus would be hailed by the Jewish rulers as a great event, and that nothing would be too good for him. They led him to believe that he would immediately receive high honors from the Sanhedrin, and that he would at last be in a position to erase the stigma of his well-meant but unfortunate association with untaught Galileans. Judas could not quite believe that Jesus' mighty works had been done by the power of the prince of devils, but he was now fully convinced that Jesus would not exert his power to glorify himself. He was at last convinced that Jesus would allow himself to be destroyed by the Jewish rulers, and he could not endure the humiliating thought of being identified with a defeated movement. He refused to entertain the idea of apparent failure. He thoroughly understood his master's sturdy character and the keenness of that majestic and merciful mind. Yet he took pleasure from considering the idea that, while Jesus was a well-meaning fanatic, he was probably not really of sound mind, that he had always appeared to be a strange and misunderstood person. And now, like never before, Judas found himself becoming strangely resentful that Jesus had never assigned him a position of greater honor. All along, he had appreciated the honor of being the treasurer for the apostles, but now he began to feel that he was not really appreciated, that his abilities were unrecognized. He was suddenly overcome with indignation that Peter, James, and John should have been given the honor of Jesus' close associates. And at this point in time, when he was on his way to the high priest's home, he was bent on getting even with Peter, James, and John more than he was concerned about betraying Jesus. But over and above all, just then, a new and dominating thought began to occupy the front of his conscious mind. He had set out to get honor for himself, and if this could be gotten at the same time as getting even with those who had contributed to his greatest disappointment in life, all the better. He was seized with a terrible conspiracy of pride, confusion, desperation, and determination. And it is made plain that it was not for money that Judas was then on his way to Caiaphas' house to arrange Jesus' betrayal. As Judas approached Caiaphas' home, he arrived at the final decision to abandon Jesus and the others. And having made up his mind to desert the cause of the kingdom of heaven, he was determined to get, as much as possible, that honor and glory that he thought would sometimes be his when he first identified himself with Jesus and the new gospel of the kingdom. All of the apostles once shared Judas's ambition, but as time passed, they learned to admire truth and to love Jesus, at least more than Judas did. The traitor was presented to Caiaphas and the Jewish rulers by his cousin, who explained that Judas, having discovered his mistake in allowing himself to be misled by the subtle teachings of Jesus, wished to make a public and formal renunciation of his association with the Galilean, and at the same time to ask for reinstatement in the confidence and fellowship of his Judean friends. Judas's spokesman went on to explain that Judas recognized it would be best for the peace of Israel if Jesus was taken into custody, and that, as evidence of his sorrow in having participated in such a movement of error, and as proof of his sincerity in now returning to the teachings of Moses, he had come to offer himself to the Sanhedrin as the one who could arrange it with the captain who was holding the orders to arrest Jesus, and that he could be taken into custody quietly, thus avoiding the danger of stirring up the people or needing to postpone his arrest until after the Passover. When his cousin had finished speaking, he presented Judas, who, stepping forward to be near the high priest, said, "All that my cousin has promised, I will do. But what are you willing to give me for this service?" Judas did not seem to detect the look of contempt, even disgust, that came over the face of the conceited and hard-hearted Caiaphas. Judas's heart was way too set on self-glory and craving the satisfaction of self-importance. And then Caiaphas looked down on the betrayer while he said, "Judas, you go to the captain of the guard and arrange with that officer to bring your master to us, either tonight or tomorrow night. And when he has been delivered by you into our hands, you will receive your reward for this service." When Judas heard this, he left and met with the captain of the temple guards as to how Jesus was going to be arrested. Judas knew that Jesus was right then away from the camp, and he had no idea when he would return that evening. So they agreed to arrest Jesus the next evening, Thursday, after the people of Jerusalem and all of the visiting pilgrims had retired for the night. Judas returned to his friends at the camp, intoxicated with thoughts of glory and grandeur like he had not had for many a day. He had enlisted with Jesus, hoping someday to become a great man in the new kingdom. He at last realized that there was not going to be a new kingdom like he had anticipated. But he rejoiced that he was so wise to trade off his disappointment in not achieving glory in an anticipated new kingdom for the immediate realization of honor and reward in the old order, which he now believed would survive, and that he was certain would destroy Jesus and all for what he stood. In the end, Judas's betrayal of Jesus was the cowardly act of a selfish deserter whose only thought was for his own safety and glorification, no matter what the results of his actions on his master and his former associates. But it was ever just that way. Judas had long been engaged in this selfish, deliberate, vengeful, and persistent progression of building up in his mind and entertaining in his heart these hateful and evil desires of revenge and disloyalty. Jesus loved and trusted Judas, even as he loved and trusted the other apostles. But Judas failed to develop loyal trust and to experience wholehearted love in return. And how dangerous ambition can become when it is completely wedded to self-seeking and supremely motivated by sullen and long-suppressed vengeance. What a crushing thing disappointment is in the lives of those foolish people who, in focusing their gaze on the shadowy and short-lived temptations of time, become blinded to the higher and more real achievements of the everlasting attainment of the eternal worlds of divine values and true spiritual realities. Judas craved worldly honor in his mind and grew to love this desire with his whole heart. The other apostles likewise craved the same worldly honor in their minds, but with their hearts they loved Jesus and were doing their best to learn to love the truths that he had taught them. Judas did not realize it at the time, but he had been a subconscious critic of Jesus ever since Herod had John the Baptist beheaded. Deep down in his heart, Judas always resented the fact that Jesus did not save John. You should not forget that Judas had been one of John's disciples before he became one of Jesus' apostles. And all of this accumulated human resentment and bitter disappointment that Judas had hatefully stored away were now well organized in his subconscious mind and ready to spring up to engulf him when he dared to separate himself from his friends' supporting influence, while at the same time exposing himself to the clever insinuations and subtle ridicule of Jesus' enemies. Every time Judas allowed his hopes to soar high and Jesus would do or say something to dash them to pieces, there was always left a bitter scar of resentment in Judas's heart. And as these scars multiplied, presently that heart, so often wounded, lost all real affection for the one who had inflicted this distasteful experience on a well-intentioned but cowardly and self-centered personality. Judas did not realize it, but he was a coward. Accordingly, he was always inclined to say that it was cowardice that caused Jesus to so often refuse to take power or glory when it was apparently within easy reach. And every mortal knows full well how love, even when once genuine, can, through jealousy, disappointment, and long-continued resentment, be eventually turned into actual hate. At last, the Sanhedrin could breathe easily for a few hours. They would not have to arrest Jesus in public, and securing Judas as a traitorous ally ensured that Jesus would not escape their jurisdiction like he had so many times in the past. The last social hour. Since it was Wednesday, this evening at the camp was a social hour. Jesus tried to cheer up his downcast apostles, but that was now well nigh impossible. They were all beginning to realize that crushing and distressing events were at hand. They could not be cheerful, even when Jesus recounted their years of eventful and loving friendship. Jesus carefully asked about the families of all of the apostles, and looking over toward David Zebedee, asked if anyone had recently heard from his mother, his youngest sister, or the other members of his family. David just looked down at his feet. He was afraid to answer. This was when Jesus warned his followers to beware of the support of the crowd. He recounted their experiences in Galilee when time and again great throngs of people enthusiastically followed them around, and then just as passionately turned against them and returned to their former ways of living and believing. And then he said, "And so you must not allow yourselves to be fooled by the great crowds that heard us in the temple, and who seemed to believe our teaching. These crowds listen to the truth and believe it superficially with their minds, but few of them permit the word of truth to strike down into their hearts with living roots. Those who know the gospel only in the mind and who have not experienced it in the heart cannot be depended on for support when real trouble comes. When the rulers of the Jews reach an agreement to destroy the Son of Man, and when they strike with one accord, you will see the crowd either flee in panic or else stand by silently amazed, while these blinded and maddened rulers lead the teachers of the gospel of truth to their death. And then, when adversity and persecution descend on you, still others who you think love the truth will be scattered, and some will renounce the gospel and desert you. Some who have been very close to us have already made up their minds to desert. You have rested today in preparation for those times that are now on us. Watch, therefore, and pray that tomorrow you may be strengthened for the days that are just ahead. The camp atmosphere was charged with a strange tension. Silent messengers came and went, communicating only with David Zebedee. Before the night had passed, some of them knew that Lazarus had quickly fled from Bethany. John Mark was ominously silent after returning to camp, even though he had spent the whole day in Jesus' company. Every effort to persuade him to talk only indicated clearly that Jesus had told him not to. Even Jesus' good cheer and his unusual friendliness frightened them. They all felt the terrible isolation was about to suddenly crash down on them with inescapable terror. They vaguely sensed what was coming, and none of them felt prepared to face the test. The Master had been away all day, and they had greatly missed him. This Wednesday evening, was the lowest point in their spiritual status up to the actual hour of Jesus' death. Although the next day was one more day nearer that tragic Friday, he was still with them, and they passed through its anxious hours more gracefully. It was just before midnight when Jesus, as he dismissed them, and knowing that this would be the last night he would ever spend with his chosen family on earth, said, "Go to your sleep, my friends, and peace be on you until we get up in the morning. One more day to do the Father's will and experience the joy of knowing that we are his sons." All right, everyone. That's it for chapter 56, Wednesday, the rest day. Coming up in a couple hours is chapter 57, the last day at the camp. Defend your liberty. Protect your kids and everybody else's. Get out there and find some way to serve man for nothing more or less than the sake of God. Bobby Keyser, out here.